Hello, chapter 25. I like this chapter. Um, I think I like a lot of this age. So this goes along kind of that similar time period with Gilded Age, Industrial Revolution. So this is kind of the social chapter. We've already talked about the economics, the political stuff, obviously the new industries. So kind of goes hand in hand, but all right, so let's do it. So one of the big obvious things is that not most, sorry, about 40% of people in America are now moving to cities. The big cities, you got like New York, Chicago, Philly, and what's the big reason? You've got jobs, obviously, with all these new factories and industry, and social. There's a social component to it too. So let's go for it. All right, so one of the kind of first inventions, we've talked about this a little bit, that goes along with this industrial revolution and the invention of steel are skyscrapers. At first, they wouldn't say they're so pretty or anything. The guy that came up with this kind of said like form follows function. So really, it's serving a function here is to go high and get more people in here for work, for a living, and that transformed America and the whole world, right? If you think about cities now, these are everywhere and even taller. So it's definitely a crazy new invention. But you're also going to have subways and trolleys and electricity and telephones and that all make these things a part of that city life. So definitely big inventions. Oh, and plumbing. That's kind of important too, right? Okay. So one of the things with city life compared to more of the country life would be consumerism. You know what that means? It's when you consume things, really. And our society today is still pretty obsessed with this, right? What kind of things can I buy? Not necessarily what I need, but what's fun, what's interesting, what makes me look cute, what just buying things. So you're going to see kind of catalogs come out, department stores, things that, again, you don't necessarily need to survive. One interesting part of this is because of that, trash is going to increase a lot. Think about that today, right? If you think about consumerism, I think of like Amazon and all the packages that get sent out in Christmas time. You've got cardboard everywhere, right? And even just packaging of actual toys or stuff. There's so much packaging. Well, so yeah, imagine kind of that, but tenfold, hundredfold of poor sanitation along with it. Um, you have people now living all in this city where there's poor sanitation, poor cleanliness. The cities are going to smell. I think we talked about that before, but garbage doesn't get collected very often. You have poor hygiene, impure water, lots of things that are going to lead to poor sanitation. People aren't showering a whole lot or cleaning themselves a whole lot. Um, this goes a little bit along with that, the last slide as well. A lot of the section of cities are going to be slums, right? Poor housing. This structure here that I just kind of pulled up, the tenement. So if you can kind of see this, it's almost like a dumbbell, right? With some weights here, you've got a dumbbell structure, and they're really just packing as many people in here as possible. So you've got lots of families. You'll see pictures of this in another chapter. There's a famous guy who wanted to show people what it was like to live in these things. But you've got people packed all in there, and you've got one bathroom, for the whole floor. The airflow is really terrible. So, like, I think about COVID, right, or the flu or something that could get passed so easily on these floors and sicknesses. And they don't have the medicine to treat these things. So, yeah, definitely a rough part of cities, especially for the poor. Now another thing is obviously they're dangerous, like not only for health reasons, but housing codes. They don't have housing codes. These things get built so fast to where they're not able to provide that kind of standard that we have today. A lot of them are made out of wood as well, and so I don't know if you've heard of the Chicago fire, this famous fire. Um, Chicago got built so fast, a lot of wooden structures that eventually it just pretty much torched the city. 15,000 buildings got burned, 90,000 people were left homeless. I went on this architecture tour. That sounds really lame. If you go to Chicago, they have, the river that runs through Chicago. I don't know if anybody been to Chicago. My brother was like, okay, one of the number one tours you need to take, because he lived in Chicago, is the architecture tour, which sounds a little lame, but they take you on the boat and they show you, kind of point out the different developments of the city. And one of the big things they said is after this fire, it gave, here's the silver lining, it gave Chicago a chance to like rebuild itself in a later kind of age and a slower pace to think about how they wanted to develop. So if you visit Chicago, it's beautiful. The architecture is really cool. I always think it's a little bit more planned out, more beautiful than Atlanta. I feel like Atlanta's kind of thrown together as it got developed. But here's another example of these slums. And yeah, think about this. If there's a fire, how quickly would it spread in the city? Like crazy, right? Dangerous living conditions. All right, so let's talk about immigration again. We talk about this a lot, don't we? Because immigrants truly define the beginning of the United States and currently, right? All right, so we have talked about immigrants before. Who have we talked about? We obviously have talked about the Irish and the Germans and the Scots Irish. We've talked about, obviously, we talked about immigrants from Britain at the very beginning. So over time, all those, they call them old immigrants now, they have adjusted, right? They're now accepted as Americans. Well, now you have this new wave of immigration. Any guesses where it's from? Now it's from Eastern Europe. I don't know if I'm pointing the right way for you. Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. And so they're going to face very similar racist, ethnic, clashes for sure. What are kind of some of the reasons here? Yeah, so this is the Italians, Austria-Hungary, Greeks, Poles. So like, yeah, you can kind of see the two different shades here. And what look at how it switches here, right? Right around here in the late 1800s, and then really a whole lot in the early 1900s. Um, so yeah, kind of what's happening here. Well, population in Europe's going to grow. Urbanization in general makes people move for jobs, right? There's going to be some persecution as well. For example, a lot of Jews are going to want to move at this time period. Um, so you've got all these new immigrants. You've got this idea, this America fever. Everything's better in America. They've got big cities, big lights. They've got this new money, really. And so I'm sure you've heard of like Ellis Island, for example. I'm going to show you a video on that tomorrow. But this wave of immigrants showing up with not much money. I mean, really, you've got a suitcase and that's what you've got to your name. Maybe you had some distant family or friends that you heard about who went earlier, but you're really showing up with not a whole lot, trying to start a new life in America. That opportunity is not just economic, it's religious as well. Um, and anyway, okay. So one of the things that gets going in this time period, like we've said already with the Gilded Age, are political machines. So they're really, really known for being in the Gilded Age, and that makes sense, right? And so that's related to all these immigrants looking for jobs or help. And obviously it was immoral and corrupt politically, but it did offer them a lot of services that they needed. Another idea that kind of comes out of this, we've talked about the gospel of wealth. Well, now this is the social gospel. This is a biblical interpretation of help. Like it is the kind of the moral responsibility. We said that before of Christians to help, to specifically help the poor. Um, so they kind of get this name, this term, the Christian socialists. And really, they use the Bible as a way to say, hey, look, we need to help. That is our goal. And you're going to see, any guesses what group of people might be specifically involved in this? You're going to get a lot of women. It almost reminds you of the Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, right? And how religion motivated them to make a lot of reforms in the early 1800s. Well, now this is, late 1800s, and now they're being inspired to help as well. One specifically famous lady, Jane Addams. So she becomes really famous for founding the Hull House. The Hull House was a mansion that she inherited, and she turns this mansion almost into like a welfare center for immigrants, for poor, and these are going to be known as settlement houses. They pop up in other cities, but settlement houses really serve a couple purposes. You've got education; they try to educate some of these immigrants. Language classes, so try to teach them language. It could be childcare, could be just like cultural things they're trying to teach them and how to fit in and how to learn new things there. Counseling, so kind of a lot of things, but specifically aimed at helping the immigrants and the poor. And it's definitely a way for women to be active. All right. So with immigration, as we know, comes nativism. You can kind of see this political cartoon. Makes sense. I think it's pretty straightforward, right? So nativism, right? Negative feelings towards immigrants. One specific group, the American Protective Association, they were an association that specifically wanted to use their resources to help stop getting Catholics in office. So this was a largely political goal aimed at voting, right? How do you ensure that politics don't get infiltrated with Catholics? I think that's an interesting description. This name, American Protective Association. They're trying to protect America. Now, if you remember, we talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Remember that? I should have asked that rather than said that out loud. The Chinese Exclusion Act was in 1882. Well, this act is also going to get passed right kind of on the heels of that. And it's really the first restrictive law over immigration that's not specifically directed straight at Chinese. But originally, they were trying to keep out criminals so they couldn't immigrate over. Convicts, criminals, the poor, the paupers, the really poor couldn't come over. And then it eventually gets even to like insane prostitutes, alcoholics, anarchists, polygamists, like all kinds of extra add-ons of who was not allowed to immigrate. And it's we've talked about that for a long time, and it's still a big discussion today on who should be able to immigrate to the United States. I'm sure you know this, but the Statue of Liberty comes around this time, 1886, and it's a gift from, from France. And I don't know if you've seen the Statue of Liberty or the plaque that goes with it. I'll read this out to you. It says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." So it's interesting, yeah, that it's got this like plaque on it, and yet at the same time, America is fighting, dealing with nativism at the same time that probably don't agree with that statement. So, now we obviously know about Protestants in the church, right? And you're going to get a group that are going to be titled like liberal Protestants. And so when we see that word liberal, what does that mean? Liberal means you are, so you've got liberal and conservative, right? So liberal means you're, how do I define this? You're a little bit more bending the rules, stretching out, going away from the conservative to, oh, that's a heck. I'm going to look up a good definition. Hold on. Okay, I just came up with this in my head. Willing to accept opinions different from your own. You're open to new ideas. Or it's a political philosophy that promotes individual rights and liberties and free enterprise. Okay, so what is this related here? You're going to start to see these Protestants who think that Protestants part of the church here, right? That think like it's their duty to become involved in these reform movements to help the poor and help the working class that are struggling right now. And so it's kind of a small wave, and maybe they kind of get going in it, but we're not really going to get reform until the next era after this Gilded Age. So, but you do see hints of it at this time period. You also see, especially with the wave of immigrants, a rise in Judaism and Catholicism. So those both come hand in hand with immigration. You also get a new denomination, the Christian Science here. And I was looking earlier on how they kind of describe their belief system. The Bible says that God is love, and so they have a lot of those core beliefs of Christianity and Jesus. Here's the part that with the science part, if I can find it. Christian Science is also a science because it's based on God as an infinite principle as well as unchanging love. Here it is. Christian Science explains the spiritual laws of love that Jesus relied on to heal sickness and sin. So they really believe that the Bible and Christianity can heal sicknesses. That true practice of Christianity can heal sickness. So that's kind of one of the different parts there. All right, let's talk about education. All right, so you know Charles Darwin, right? Charles Darwin, natural selection. What's the big idea here? Survival of the fittest and evolution, right? And that humans have evolved over time and mutated in order to adapt and survive. That's the big thing, is right? Is you adapt and you survive. And the ones that don't die off. And evolution became this controversial topic between fundamental Christians because they did not believe that this evolution could have happened from animals. And it's going to get really heated. I think this is another chapter later where it goes to court over one specific teacher at one school teaching this. But for now, this idea causes a clash between fundamentalists who say, no, the creation story does not mix with evolution. Those are separate. Whereas here's our term liberal again, kind of open to new ideas. They are going to kind of figure out how do we mesh Christianity and the views of creation with Darwin and evolution. So you're going to see this almost mix of those two ideas come together with liberals. That's definitely kind of a big, new, controversial topic. In 1900, you're going to see the rise of public high schools. And remember, we talked about public schools with the Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening. And now you're going to see definitely a rise of this. I want to pull this up. By 1900, there was a 10.7 illiteracy rate, meaning about 90% of adults could read. That's very good. That's actually better than today. Now we're at like 79% literacy rate. But with all that being said, African Americans, their illiteracy rate was 44%, meaning 56% could read, and then you got 44 that can't. So you're going to kind of see two groups come out of in this civil rights. It's kind of an early term for this time period. But I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Um, there's obviously, if you think about the Gilded Age and the effects of Reconstruction and the Civil War and slavery, African Americans are at a huge disadvantage. If you think about everything they've been through, that they were not allowed to read, they were not allowed to write, they were not allowed to vote. It's been pressed down for so long. So what's the strategy now? How should they fight all this? So Booker T. Washington, super famous. He was a former slave and he went to teach at the Tuskegee Institute. Have you heard of that? Tuskegee Institute. So super famous. And it's kind of like a trade school. And his belief was, let's work hard, let's get social respect, let's get economic security by learning these trades, right? Learning something that could make us money, and be comfortable in that zone. Because we've got some social respect, we've got some economic security. Well, he really got criticized, even though he's teaching these blacks how to do a lot of these skills at this institute. The other side of it, W.E.B. Du Bois kind of argued was, no, you're being an accommodationist. You are accommodating yourself to racism, to segregation. You're accepting it. Where WB was basically like, no, I'm not going to accept it. I'm going to fight for equal rights, right? This is our goal, to fight for equal rights. And he was actually the helped found the NAACP, who's still in action today to help with equality issues. He was the first black to earn a PhD at Harvard. So he is definitely known for pushing the envelope to try and continue to fight for civil rights. Another thing with education at this time are land grant colleges, meaning, I think we've talked about this before, they're getting land from the government to start these public colleges. So we've already talked about the beginning of colleges. Now you're going to get like Ohio State, University of California, Texas A&M. So they've been given this land and just getting more people in college. All right, the press. This is a big era. This is kind of end of 1800s and beginning of 1900s. It's a big era for the press. Because if you think about the advancements in industry and in technology, now you're going to see newspapers become very famous and popular. It's a better word, popular. Books have already been printing, but now it's newspapers kind of take off, and you're going to see that start to affect a lot of things. So sensationalism, I bet you can guess from the name in this picture. It's basically like putting big titles and pictures on newspapers that are a little bit dramatized. Dramatized, that's the word. Dramatized, a little bit excessive, almost like, what would you call it now in our culture? Like clickbait, right? Getting them to read it, exciting headlines about romance, about about sexualized things, about controversy, to get people to read them, and it worked. I'm gonna skip that first word in a second. But Pulitzer, I know you have heard that name, Pulitzer Prize. Pulitzer and Hearst, they were the big newspaper like syndicates. They were the big ones that in New York were printing out, competing, and who can get the best stories. And so they used sensationalism. And so this whole like method of journalism became known as yellow journalism. Actually starts because in the yellow pages of the newspaper were comics and they were fighting over their cartoonist. But anyway, so yeah, they were definitely known for big yellow journalism. Real quick side note: has anybody seen the Newsies before? Come on, anybody? All right, I'm into like Broadway shows, but the Newsies are about like all the newspaper boys, and they make no money, and eventually they go on strike against William Randolph Hearst, and I would sing for you, but anyway. So with along with newspapers, then you're going to get magazines. This is Harper's Weekly. It becomes a super famous magazine, and um, come on, my computer's not working. New York Nation is another magazine, and it's very political though. It has a lot of political um, articles in there, and that is really going to push the envelope once we get to the 1900s and we need change. So definitely the press is going to be a big part of reform and writing articles to criticize the businessmen, the corruption, the politicians. But that's a little bit more the next era that we'll get to, not the Gilded Age, but it's the beginning. All right, so what does city life do to family life? No, I wouldn't say a lot of great things. You've got a new era of morality. And that makes sense a little bit with the times are changing, more people in cities, there's maybe some more money going around, there's harder lives. So you're going to see divorce rates are going to go up. Women are going to start to be a little bit more independent, especially the single ones who have money or making money. Birth controls gonna kind of come around during this time. Just sexual topics are gonna be discussed more. So kind of due to that, they call it a divorce revolution. But just the increase of divorce rates and morality has started to change. Um, yeah, so females. Now, most married women are not going to go to work because that kind of goes against morality, and you're supposed to stay at home and take care of the kids. And but a lot of single women do start to kind of go to work, and you see here is like telephone operators, which is funny because they're going to start with boys as being. Did I say this already? Boys are telephone operators, but they cuss too much, so they had to switch to women. Yeah, a lot of like white women are going to be secretaries or operators. They're going to work for department stores, selling clothes and things like that. Um, Whereas a lot of non-whites are not allowed those type of jobs. They're offered the low factory kind of jobs. Um, Also, kind of with this development, they're still pushing, obviously, for women's suffrage, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. The big lady kind of taking charge now is Carrie Chapman Catt. Still fighting the fight. We're getting closer, but still fighting the fight. And you have your big argument that women are hugely important to society, so they should probably vote. Right. And then temperance. Here's temperance. We've been talking about temperance for a long time. So you might see some like the beginnings, really, especially in this next era of reforms like temperance versus alcohol. A lot of similarities to the Great Awakening. But and sorry, can I add this real quick? Temperance. One reason this kicked back up was because the work was so hard in factory life. In the Civil War, liquor usage went up, so they're fighting that again. Now let's talk about literature and art. So one of the movements here is realism. Can you guess what that means? They're trying to portray people in a real way, right? I don't know if you remember before it was romanticism, where everything is emotional and painted that way. Now it's okay. Well, let's show us real life. Have you read Huckleberry Finn? I mean, that Mark Twain really sets up that realistic what is it like to live and the negatives and everything. So there you go. Fun fact, this picture came up as a Jeopardy like final question. And Mr. Marchman and I are pretty competitive, and he knew it, and I was so mad, but now I know it. Ready? The portrait. No, that's not it. Ah, Whistler's mother, something like that. I think it's Whistler's mother. So there you go. If you ever see that, you got it. You're welcome. Remember me. Now another what's the word, branch of literature that comes out is naturalism. So I don't know if you've read The Call of the Wild. A movie came out that recently. The Red Badge of Courage. It's interesting. The goal of the naturalism is basically saying, and it's kind of offshoot of realism, but what would humans do in their natural ways, right? In their kind of natural, deep down, what would humans do when the environment is making you, like, let's say you're in this terrible environment, maybe it's inner city, you're really poor. Like, what would humankind do in those situations? It's not always kind of pretty, right? Okay. Um, all right, regionalism. I feel like you can guess this one. Regionalism. This is now, so we've talked about the growth of arts and literature, of American literature, right, and art. Well, now, not just American, but regional. And it kind of shows you what life is like in the South, in the Northeast. The goal is to show you those regions and what's particular to those regions. And that's in art and literature. This is an interesting offshoot of, I guess you could say, art. One of the goals for some cities, some big important cities, was how can we make America beautiful, specifically our big cities. And so you'll see like Chicago, New York, with Central Park, Washington, and the park there. How do we make those cities beautiful? And so they really had. I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that too. They had specifically planning. How do we plan for beautiful? And that's where I think like Atlanta missed the mark in this time period. We're already developed. I don't think they really developed well after the Civil War, but these cities did. In Chicago, they had something called the World's Fair. Sorry, let me show you this. Columbian Exposition, or the World's Fair, and it's basically people all over the world come to Chicago and see what kind of technology there is, see what kind of architecture there is. It's almost like a big fair. Um, and this is where you see, there's, you can't see my face is in the way. There we go. A lot of new things were developed before this fair in Chicago to make it beautiful. Even the Ferris wheel was brought here. If I saw that for the first time, I'm not going on that. I don't know what that thing does. But the goal, yeah, is how can we make Chicago and America beautiful? This is also a famous art. Oh, I should know this style of art. But it's the Robert Gould Shaw Memorial. Oh, I'm mad at myself for not knowing. Bas Relief, is that right? Anyway, this was a white general leading black infantry troops into battle in the Civil War. All right, here's the last one, the last slide. Amusement. What do we do for fun? Look what started coming around. Barnum and Bailey, the greatest show on earth. Have you seen what's that movie? They dance and they sing, and it's so good. Anyway, yeah, that one. The Greatest Showman, right? And nowadays it's like, well, then maybe that wasn't very ethical to uh, people or animals. But that definitely started then. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And this would definitely show Buffalo Bill, Annie Oakley, how they chased down Native Americans. That sounds unethical too. And how they could shoot and fight and all that kind of stuff. What else came around this time? Baseball, America's pastime. So baseball really takes off here. Ooh, you know who this is? Naismith, if you're a basketball fan. Naismith, that's the name of the award given every year for college basketball, right? So I'm sure you heard that, the peach basket. That's how basketball first started. Pugilism, anybody know? That's boxing. Boxing got going in this time period. And football. So definitely a lot to keep people's minds off of, oh my gosh, we're getting oppressed by businesses, politics are corrupt, but hey, let's go do this and forget all those troubles. So anyway, a lot going on kind of this time period. It's interesting, I think. So alrighty, thanks guys.